Hello, everyone, and welcome to this podcast. We're going to spend some time talking about our Live 5 for 2025 at Consult Hyperion. This is something that we do every year. We produce at the start of the year just some thoughts about the things that we think are going to be important. And I'm really pleased that with me today, I've got two of my colleagues, Tim Richards and Gary Munro. So I'll let them introduce themselves. So Tim.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Richards. I work for Steve and Gary, and I do loads of payment stuff, including loads of things in the area that we're talking about today. So digital wallets. So yeah, interesting area. But we'll no doubt get onto that in a moment. Gary?
Hi, I'm Gary Munro, and along with Steve and Tim, we work to make payments better for everyone.
Great, and I'm Steve Panifer, Managing Director of Consult Hyperion. So we're going to spend the time thinking about wallets. So when we thought about what's coming on next in 2025, usually what we do is we have 4 or 5 different topics that we're thinking about. These are the themes of the year, but there's so much happening in the wallet space. We felt that we had to devote all 5 kind of points to wallets themselves. We're doing loads of work in the space in all sorts of different contexts, and so we've got 5 different points in our Live 5 that talk about wallets. So we're going to step through those a bit and have a bit of a discussion about them for the next few minutes. But before we do that, I thought it'd be nice to just touch on what are some of the things we're actually doing in the space. Tim, you're doing stuff in CBDC, right? So wallets have a role to play there.
Yeah, CBDC and also instant payments. I mean, CBDC is actually a form of instant payments. So, think about in the UK, faster payments is essentially pretty much instantly settled. Those networks are appearing all over the world. There's 70 of them already. And those are real, of course. CBDC is still theoretical, although it's fairly clear that some jurisdictions are moving very rapidly in that direction. And in that space, the digital wallet is a critical thing. You go all over the world, you'll find different sorts of wallets connecting to different sorts of payment networks. Increasingly, we're seeing them, circumventing card payment networks and going to instant payment networks. That links into all sorts of other things. It links into tokenization. It links into digital identity. And it also links into sort of slightly more technical issues I'm sure we'll come on to, like how you initiate. And then we get into QR codes and NFC interfaces and what's happening around the various platforms. So yeah, we're doing all sorts of things around that, and it's just burgeoning. It's increasing everywhere you look. There's more of this stuff actually happening. And I could carry on talking about it, but I'm sure we're going to get into some of those details later on.
And perhaps before we do get into those details, Gary, I was thinking we don't necessarily have a clear definition or an idea of what a wallet is, but what do you think we mean by a digital wallet here? What's the kind of thing we're talking about?
Well, I think the analogy is to your personal wallet is where you store your cards or your credentials, which you're then going to use for payment or for loyalty or for transit. It's if you think about it, it's a digital equivalent of a physical wallet is the best way around that. And of course, being digital, you can do more with it.
Well, yeah, but contrast that with a super app, for example.
Yeah,
the different super app links.
We might come back to that later. Yeah. So,
I mean, as Tim was saying about instant payments and digitization and tokenization, that there are different forms of wallets and who owns the wallet. So we can think about if we think about Apple and Google Pay, then those are wallets which are on our physical devices. But then we also have merchant wallets where we log into an account with a merchant when we sign into them. And then we have more general. PayPal is one of the first wallets, if you think about it like that, for e-commerce. And it's all about providing access to payments, well, and beyond, as I'm sure we'll discuss.
Yeah, so that leads nicely into the first point on our Live 5, where we kind of, I guess, hit the sort of billion-dollar question straight on, which is, what's the role of Apple and Google in all of this? I'm involved in lots of wallet-related conversations. In my case, a lot of it's in the identity space. And there's always a question of, well, is it kind of inevitable that Apple and Google will take the place sort of predominant provider of wallets. You can see this already starting to happen in a sense in the US with the mobile driving licenses, where the majority of them being issued through those OEM wallets. And in that first point, we're asking the question, well, okay, what's the role that they will play? And from a regulatory point of view, and think of like an antitrust or a competition point of view, do we think that there's going to be a need or a desire for the governments to come in and maybe intervene to do something about that? What are your thoughts on that whole kind of topic? Role of Apple and Google and how they fit into the ecosystem.
Apple and Google kicked all of this off for where we're sitting with introducing tokenization as part of the security mechanisms. And over the years, they've built up a secure ecosystem from which we can store our cards and make payments from our mobile phone. So it brings an awful lot of convenience to the consumer, and that's through the devices. But as this has grown over time, then people start to get a little bit concerned about access and about the control of the wallet or access to the technology, the mobile devices, so that they could then put competing wallets in that space. And the regulators, we've seen the regulators in various countries now starting to kick back and put their teeth into this and start to put down legislation to enable access to these wallets or to the technology to allow other wallets to exist.
Yeah, so it feels like they have a role to play. I mean, inevitably they have a role to play because they're delivering the device, the platform, so they have to have a role to play. And the question is, what is that role, and can it be done in a way that allows like an open environment where other parties can play, rather than them just kind of like, I guess, grabbing all of the value.
Well, it's a vertical issue, isn't it? I mean, basically, Google and Apple in particular control the whole vertical. They don't just control the platform; they control access to the platform. They control the use of the platform, and particularly in Apple's case, they actually control what applications you can run on that platform. Now, the question is whether or not the regulators are interested in trying to unbundle some of that. We've seen it in Europe. Particularly where they've gone after the NFC interface lockdown that Apple have had in place, where you can only use the NFC interface on apps installed in their secure element, and you can only use that secure element if you go through Apple, so they control the whole thing. The EU has now managed to break that open, whereby you can put a different app on the phone with access to the NFC interface. You can't use the secure element. You can use the phone. And what that means is you're starting to see the digital wallets in Europe looking at introducing their own essentially face-to-face commerce wallet capability, because most of them in the past have been e-commerce or P2P. Suddenly they can add this extra use case and get the full range of functionality. And then you're into all sorts of issues with competition, but you're into a local versus international question as well. Can you have a local wallet that actually has superior functionality in that locality to the international wallets, and what is the effect of it? So I think we're seeing the start of some of this unbundling. I think it's got a lot further to go, and we're going to see regulators and all sorts of parties across the space pushing to get access to some of these services that at the moment are locked down. Okay,
very good. So I'm going to move us along fairly quickly. The next point that we had in Live5, number 2, we called it the social need. And really what we were thinking about was that, as we've already said a little bit, wallets have a role far beyond payments. The use of wallets for payments it's probably been the main use case so far. But there's the potential role far beyond payments. And if we think about the physical wallets we have, as you said, Gary, those have not just payment cards in, but they have other things in as well, like a driving license or a library card or who knows what, loyalty cards, and so there's moving that into the digital world. There's obviously a lot of other things that wallets could facilitate. So what do you think maybe the short, medium, and longer term scope of that could be? Gary, what do you think?
Well, it's an interesting question, but you think about it from what it enables and what it doesn't enable, and then you think about the inclusion side of things. If everything starts to move towards these digital wallets, then what do we do? How do we address the digitally excluded as part of this? So that needs to come into some of the thinking. But thinking about it from social need to social good, I think this is your area of expertise, Steve, is the digital identity space.
Mm.
You know, if we have strong digital identities which work for us, and these are part of our digital wallets, then that can enable much quicker access to different services.
Yeah, because in the physical world, we have documents like passports and driving licenses, which can be used through some document scanning thing to get access to digital, but they're a bit clunky. But the bigger issue is the one that you've raised, which is that there's a big proportion of the population, a significant proportion of the population, who have just as much need to access digital services as the rest of us who don't have those documents.
Yeah.
And so when we're looking at digital credentials, then it's really important that we don't ignore that group. That group will need to have access, and it's the case in a lot of the digital identity conversations, particularly with governments. They're very concerned to make sure that they have credentials that they can issue out to all members of the population, not just the ones that happen to have the top end phone or access to the right documents. So I think that's a really, really important topic. And in fact, when you look at what's happening in Europe around the EIDAS program, which is the big sort of identity, well, it's identity regulation, but it's a whole kind of massive European-wide program that's being driven from the European Commission. Then in there, when they're talking about, well, firstly, they require member states to make wallets available to all of their citizens. So there's already an inclusion aspect there. But then secondly, the very first credential that you issue into those wallets is a thing called personal identity data, PID, it's called. And that's not a driving license or a passport or an EID. It's just the data that you need that's wrapped up in a particular form that's defined within that framework. And so what they're kind of, I guess, trying to achieve is giving everyone access that wants to access to a wallet that has that fundamental data that you can then start to build other things off around it. So accessibility and access and inclusion is going to be really important.
Yeah, but I think that the important thing to emphasize when we're talking about these digital identities within digital wallets is the security that comes with them and the ability to prove that these are genuine.
The inclusivity issue is interesting, and it's sort of double-edged, right? So if you are digitally enabled, digital identity is the critical use case going forward. I mean, in a world in which AI can impersonate anybody, and I can have my own AI, and somebody can impersonate my own AI, you need a strong digital identity service which can actually support that entire process. I need to be able to assert my identity online, and digital wallets are clearly critical to that. If you're not basically digitally enabled, but all of the services are only available online, then you've got to think about a different solution. We're seeing this in CBDC, where central banks realize quite clearly they cannot force citizens to have a smartphone in order to participate in something which is a digital form of cash. That issue applies across the board. You can't just look at wallets, or if wallets are the critical issue that gives you access to these services, your wallet cannot simply reside on a smartphone and cannot rely on an individual having a smartphone. The two things are separate and need to be separated. And that's a critical issue that basically we need to deal with going forward. Digital wallets have to have a life beyond smart devices.
I mean, I guess interestingly, in one of our projects, Tim, we were looking at a number of different form factors for those wallets. That included the obvious ones like smartphones, but actually, you know, maybe there's a need for a central bank to be a provider of a wallet of last resort, you know, for people that haven't got an alternative. Maybe there are some other technologies where you can build something that provides maybe not the full set of features that you get from an OEM wallet, but provides features to allow people to interact with that digital world.
Well, we have looked at this, haven't we, for when we start to think about fingerprint cards and how fingerprint cards can provide that secure access to what credentials are stored on those plastic cards. So you don't need to have a smartphone to provide the credentials. The advantage of the smartphone is the user interface which comes with it. But providing you can have that user interface somewhere else, you can carry that credential and interact with the digital world.
This is all true, but the most vulnerable members of society, either the elderly or the excluded and whatever, don't have access to any of these services. And in fact, many of them don't even have an identity as we would actually associate it. We've done stuff looking globally at sort of, delivering funds into regions where there's disasters of various kinds. It's a massive, massive challenge, but it's the same problem, right? It's just coming out in a different form. And we need solutions that actually fit those kinds of use cases, not just the standard ones that we, as technically enabled, maybe slightly later middle-aged people face in a fairly advanced economy. There's a lot of the world that this doesn't apply to.
So let's move along. So we've done two. Third point on the Live5 was around, well, I guess two things. So we talked about the commercial imperative. In other words, what is it that makes wallets? What will make wallets kind of compelling propositions? I guess that's both to wallet providers, but also to users of wallets. And I think you can link with that the idea of wallets not just being like a fairly dumb thing, like unintelligent thing, like a physical wallet, but actually, if we're putting credentials inside a wallet, there's the potential for building something much more sophisticated that provides tools and capabilities to users to interact kind of on their behalf. You can think of the sort of the AI agent type idea. So what are your thoughts on that in terms of, is the current sort of view or the current idea that we have about wallets, is it sophisticated enough, I guess, or do we need to?
Not at the moment. Yeah, like you say, it is dumb. You select the card you want to use and off you go. The only place where it gets reasonably intelligent is where the reader is indicating that I accept the loyalty cards, and so you can have your loyalty and card payment in specific locations. Or if you look at transit, where the reader basically indicates to the user that it is a transit environment, which allows the wallet to select the card which you've nominated for transit payments, and you don't have to use your Face ID, Touch ID, whatever.
Because this is already starting to happen a little bit. So I was in Paris a few weeks ago, and as I'm sure you're aware, when you're in Paris, you open up your OEM wallet, or this particular one, and it knew that I was in Paris, and therefore within the wallet gave me the ability to buy the ticket to go onto the Paris metro.
Yeah.
So you just kind of open up the wallet, push a button, and you're on the metro. So you need like very little kind of, you don't need to think about and worry about how you're going to get around the Paris metro system. The wallet just kind of does it for you, and it does it in the context that you're in. So that for me is like an early example of the kind of intelligence that we're talking about here. If we've got dozens, maybe even hundreds of credentials for different purposes, it's going to be too much for any individual to manage. So they'll need something to do it for them. And I think that's all tied in with how to make this work for consumers or wallet users, and also to work for the businesses that want to adopt those things, because everyone's interested in reducing friction and making things work better.
Yeah. And so, we've all got drawers full of loyalty cards sitting, which we never use. But if those loyalty cards are all digital and the loyalty card is automatically used when we go into our favourite merchants, then that brings a benefit to the wallet user. And so the wallet is starting to work for you to maximise benefit. But then if you take it further and we start to look at AI and adding in more complex payments, to have your wallet automatically select which type of payment you use. for the purchase that you're doing at that point in time, then that becomes quite interesting. Starts to raise questions for what happens in a dispute process. I didn't make that payment, my AI made that payment.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the key issue is right there, and I think at the moment nobody knows how to regulate this stuff. Right? I mean, I mean, technically we can sort of do it, sort of. We can't quite really, but we sort of know how to get to where this needs to go. The thing is, if you're handing over these decisions, and many of these are decisions that people are historically very bad at. I mean, if you look at finance, for example, people are terrible at making financial decisions by and large for a whole bunch of evolutionary reasons. So there's good reason for doing it, but what happens when those people don't get the results that they want, which they surely won't at some point? How does that get resolved? So disputes are only part of that. And what happens when people start gaming the system in order to ensure that their particular app is prioritized over something? I mean, there's all sorts of issues here that we haven't even thought about yet. And that's all going to have to be addressed. So there's almost like another layer of reg tech or something that's going to have to be built around this stuff in order to make sure that it's safe. And I'm sure that won't happen ahead of it happening. Right? I'm sure that'll happen afterwards, because regulation is always running along with its trousers around its ankles, desperately chasing the latest technological advantage down the road.
Which is an interesting question in Europe, because they've regulated wallets into existence, or that's what they're doing in the identity space, whether actually those wallets won't be sophisticated enough because the regulators can't think of what the requirements may be in their sort of in the real world. You need innovation for that to happen.
Yeah, and you'd argue, potentially that is the wrong way round, but on the other hand, it's probably safer. You could argue within the same problem with open banking in Europe. Okay, it's been regulated into existence, and that means that the regulated entities, aka the banks, have done varyingly level jobs actually implementing that service, and that's been detrimental to the consumer experience. So yeah, it's a challenge, but the principle, intelligent wallets and whatever, I mean, it's coming. But by and large, the wallets we have today are not intelligent. They're pretty damn dumb, frankly.
One of those issues with open banking was around interoperability, and it's interoperability at different layers in the stack, which leads us into the fourth point in our Live5, which is about the technical choices that need to be made. I think, certainly in terms of the things that we're involved in, and what I think society as a whole needs, and what we'd like to see, is a fairly open ecosystem where there are choices in terms of wallets. Wallets work ideally seamlessly in all sorts of different contexts. In order for that to work, it's important that interoperability is thought about and considered. So that's what the fourth point is. So at the moment we have, I guess, in some respects, kind of islands of activity. You've got the island of payment wallets, or maybe there's some regions where there's islands of activity around identity. And we know that in the transit space that those are often systems that are built as closed ecosystems as well. So how do we move forwards and start to move in a direction where things will be interoperable in the future?
We learn from our mistakes, don't we? I mean, we're facing the crazy situation in Europe where we have the EIDAS wallet, we have the Wero wallet, and then the digital Euro wallet, and they're not interoperable, which just confuses the users and actually is a barrier to adoption. But this, you can see where the regulator could actually come into play here, where they're starting to think about, okay, no, this must be interoperable. You must be able to use this in X, Y, Z.
This is something that the payment networks have done, partly because they've had decades to do it, but they've done very well in that they've managed to set up standards and rules and certification kind of regimes in place, testing regimes, so that you do get to the point that, I mean, I don't think people realize what goes into, you present your contactless card to a contactless terminal. People don't realize what goes into making that, user experience is so simple. I mean, you can't make it any simpler, and it's so reliable. But the work that goes behind the scenes in terms of building the standards, testing things to death, is that has to happen. Otherwise, otherwise, I
Oh,
don't think.
we do it day in, day out for our clients as we're
Hmm.
working on this. This is the stuff that's done and is forgotten about. We're constantly working in this space, and we're looking at how to enable this in different ways, whether it's digitization services. But yeah, you're right. It's all about the standards and bringing those standards together. And that means people have to work in cooperation. And where you're in a competitive environment, cooperating for the social good, if you like, is difficult without someone sitting above this saying, okay, this is where we're going, this is what we need to do.
Hmm.
To go back to Steve's point, I mean, the international card schemes get a lot of flack, and some of that is justified. But the ability to go anywhere in the world, pull your card out of your wallet and use it is a modern miracle. It is absolutely incredible. And given that we know what's going on behind the scenes, it's even more of a miracle. But it
Yes.
works, and it works absolutely reliably.
Yeah.
But I don't really think you could actually do that now. Right? It's really, really hard to form that level of global interoperability. And if you look at payments, now what we're seeing is silos emerging, and then those silos being integrated together. Right? So, every country is developing its own instant payment system. None of them are interoperable, but you can make them interoperable if you put the work in.
But is this not the journey that the card networks went through like 40, 50 years ago? They had, lots of individual schemes emerging, and then there were acquisitions, and things came together. And then, if you think about some smart card payments, EMV payments, well, the EMV organization formed sort of in the 90s off the back of a few other organizations. So it's this stuff doesn't happen overnight, but it needs to be an important thing that people have in mind, right?
Yeah, well, I've gone through the last 40 years seeing it happen. I don't think I can do another 40 years again. But what I do think is that there is an underpinning here, particularly for the digital wallets, that we can and should get right. Some of it's the technical stuff we've talked about. I think the digital identity stuff is essential. If you can figure out a way of having global digital identity, you can build this stuff on top of it. And even if it's not integrated together at the moment, you can find ways of moving things between one silo and another via the digital wallets. So maybe in the end, they end up becoming, the integration layer. They become the interoperability layer. And yeah, I'm sure you're right. Over time, we'll see more and more interoperability across the world. But, some of it is really difficult. I mean, they're still talking about cross-border CBDC. Well, they've been talking about something like that for 100 years, and we're nowhere near coming together at the moment. So I think there's massive challenges in some of these areas.
Okay, so there's some long-term vision. Let's get much more short-term. So the last point on the Live5 was about compelling use cases, and it was really just exploring, what are the things that we'll see, the use cases that we'll see around wallets that happen first. So what are your views on what those the low-hanging fruit is for wallet usage?
Well, I think we're starting to see some of it, aren't we? Where if you think about your digital hotel key, where you can check in on your phone and your hotel room key is downloaded to your phone wallet, and off you go. But we can start to see if you start to look, okay, where does that take you? Well, why can't you have your car key in the wallet? Your key for your when we start to have electronic locks and
yeah, in the US, you've got travel as well. So using mobile driving license to get onto a domestic flight, that's supported, or there's a waiver in place from TSA to enable that to happen. Age restricted kind of applications, so buying alcohol, for example. I mean, the UK government's made some announcements about going to be producing some kind of wallet this year. Is not a lot of detail out yet, but specifically targeted at addressing that use case, and there are lots of other things going on. So so some low hanging fruit. I've got so those are the five the Live5 points from the start of the year. I've got a couple of questions just to ask the both of you, just sort of crystal ball gazing, just as we wrap this up. So thinking, like, looking to the future, I'm not going to put a time frame on it, but just thinking about in the future. Do you think we're going to, I just want very short answers. Do you think we're going to have one or many wallets?
Many.
Okay, many. Okay, that's good. So both saying many. Do you think the predominant wallets are going to be OEM wallets, or are they going to be someone else's wallet?
I think it depends on the individual
Sitting on the fence. All right, okay.
and depends who you trust, because
Okay.
it's about trust. And I think brand is going to be really important here.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be both. If you look in Norway, where Vipps have just released their own wallet with NFC access on Apple, okay, that's going to get traction because of the brand value in Norway and the fact that they can address specific Norwegian use cases. Okay, so, but that will sit alongside, for example, the Apple Wallet, which people will use for other purposes.
Okay, so your answer is both. I'll take that. That's fine. And then the last question, you'll have to listen to this one carefully. Are wallets going to be a destination, or are they part of the journey? What I mean by that is, do you go into your wallet and do stuff, or are you doing stuff and then you just bring your wallet in to help solve a particular problem? It's that super app thing we talked about. Right?
Oh, that's the super app end of things, isn't it?
Super app versus non-super app wallet. What do you think?
I think it's generational.
Yes, I was going to say that. I'm too old to answer that question.
I think if you're a digital native, I can see it in my children who are 10 years apart, right? Two of them grew up as the internet was coming in, and they're not really digital natives. The youngest one grew up and just does everything via the, online stuff, via the digital wallet. It's a generational thing, and I think, we are the wrong people to be answering that question.
Speak for yourself, Tim. I feel fairly youthful myself. But anyway, wanted to thank you both. Thanks, Tim. Thanks, Gary. It's been a great conversation. Clearly, it's a hot topic. There's lots more that we could talk about. The blog, the Live5 blog's on our website. You can go and find it and read it. And of course, get in touch if you want to have a conversation about any of these things. Thank you for listening.
Thanks.
Thank you all.